Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering, with a focus, of course, on Commander. And before we start, really quick, if you would like to support me on Patreon, there is a link down below. I know this channel is still growing, but it would really mean the world to me since I eventually want to make this my full-time thing. Anyway, without further ado, today we're doing a new Commander deck, and today is quite a special one because this is the first Selesnya deck I've ever made. I'm not a big fan of Selesnya and Commander. I find all the decks kind of samey, but when I came upon Gluntch recently, I knew I had to build him. Gluntch the Bestower is a legendary creature, jellyfish from Baldur's Gate. He's a pretty chunky boy. He's a 0/5 flyer, so it's going to be difficult to remove early game, but he has a pretty cool ability which lets us choose a player to put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature they control, choose a player to draw a card, and choose a player to create 2 treasure tokens. Those are all really good abilities. Unfortunately, the catch is that we have to choose different players for all of these. Now, another thing I've never really built is a political pillow fort style deck, and this is definitely all of that. So I'm super excited to go over the list with you guys, and I hope you guys can also help me by giving some suggestions, because this is really not my normal style of play. Without further ado, let's get started. And we're starting with Archon of Absolution. He's a pretty cool one because he is going to make it harder for opponents to attack us. It's going to encourage people to attack other players by costing 1 for each creature that wants to attack us. Now, it also has protection from white, which I think is kind of relevant since a lot of removal in the format, especially targeted removal, is white, such as Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, and Generous Gift. I think this is a cool card in the deck. Baird is basically another copy of the same ability. It's going to stop people from attacking us unless they pay 1. If we have enough of these effects in play, we should hopefully discourage our opponents and make them go somewhere else. Combat Calligrapher is a nice little political tool. If anybody attacks your opponents, including yourself, they are going to get an Inkling. This is hopefully going to encourage people to attack one another and leave us outside of that. The Inklings can't attack you either, so it's really going to just provide value for the whole table. They do get to attack you with the Inklings if they remove this, but why would they remove this? They're getting free flyers out of it. It's a pretty sweet card. Conclave Mentor does a lot of things that we want to be doing in this deck. Gluntch has a +1/+1 counter ability, so that's going to work really well if we choose to put those counters on our own creatures. It also is going to gain us a bunch of life when it dies. That's going to be pretty nice too, since we can make it pretty big with all the +1/+1 counters. Dawnbreak Reclaimer is a really cool political card that I'm surprised doesn't see a little bit more play. It does constantly give us a steady stream of reanimation. You're probably going to get the worst card in your graveyard, but you're also going to give the worst card back to your opponent. But that being said, you're still getting a free creature, and if you can talk your opponent into giving you something good in exchange for giving them something good, it can be very beneficial for both of you. Elvish Mystic is just mana ramp. Evolution Sage is going to be pretty nice in this deck. We have many ways to get extra lands into play, and even with just our normal land drops for the turn, we can proliferate those counters that we're going to be putting on our creatures all over the place. It should be pretty good. Vanguard Marauder is there to take the sting a little bit out of the treasure tokens that we may be giving our opponents. Even if we give them to ourselves, each treasure token we sacrifice is going to gain us 5 life. That's pretty solid, and it can help the pillow forting. Flumph is a nice one for making some friends and drawing some extra cards. We're going to block stuff and draw cards off of it. Not much to say, pretty good. Forgotten Ancient should get pretty big in this deck, so another sub-theme we have is creatures that get bigger whenever anybody does stuff. We're going to give lots of free resources to our opponents, but then when they use them, they're going to make our stuff grow bigger. Forgotten Ancient does that really well, and it can also move its counters onto other stuff, making all of our proliferate effect that much better. Generous Patron is an all-star in the deck. It's one of our favorite cards. It works very well with Forgotten Ancient. If we have this in play in Forgotten Ancient, we can spread those counters around onto all of our opponent's creatures and draw an absolute ton of cards, so that's pretty nice too. It's just a really cool and unique effect, and I really like it in this deck. Jaya Sage works really well with Glunch's +1/+1 counter effect. We also have many other ways to put counters on it. That being said, we don't need to specifically give it counters. Just with Evolve alone, it will be growing quite a bit since we have a lot of creatures with high toughness in this deck. Hopeful Initiate is going to be really good at controlling enchantments and artifacts that our opponents have, because we have so many counters going around, it should be trivial to remove too. Lae'zel, Lekith's champion, is going to be really sweet for getting us extra counters, so that's a really nice way to keep our board growing steadily. Mana Gorger Hydra is another of those cards that we've put in because they'll grow whenever our opponents do anything. We really like this one. It's going to get huge. Master of Ceremonies is one of the most fun cards in the deck. It gives your opponents choices about what to pick, but no matter what they pick, you're getting an advantage. Obviously, the worst thing they can do is choose creature tokens. It may occasionally be bad if they have sacrifice strategies, since you can't really use the 1/1s that well, but the other two effects are really good, and they will occasionally come up, so this is a really fun card. Neil's Discipline Enforcer really hoses certain decks. Decks that rely on +1/+1 counters by themselves will not be able to attack you at all, and you can also put enough +1/+1 counters on your opponent's threats that it's going to be difficult for them to attack you, and it's going to be costly, importantly. So it's just a very gentle way to encourage people to attack other players, and it also grows your own creatures, which is really nice. Orzhov Advocate is a similar effect to Neo's. It's going to prevent people from attacking you when they put counters on their creatures, but you're giving them free counters, so why wouldn't they take them? It makes it difficult for our opponents to decide what to do, and they're kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't. Root Weaver Druid is a really cool one, and it creates lots of very interesting patterns. The opponents are going to have to choose what they do. The first player is going to be under a lot of stress, because depending on what they choose, it could really screw them over. Obviously, they're probably going to end up searching for 2 lands each, but if they do, you get 3 lands, so you're actually coming out slightly ahead, even though you are ramping them. I think this is a very fun and interactive kind of card. Selfless Squire is going to be awesome in the deck. When people eventually get annoyed with you and swing at you with a bunch of stuff, you're just going to flash this in and get a huge creature by preventing all of that damage. Selvala Explorer Returned is one of those symmetrical cards that's not quite symmetrical. Yes, everybody's going to be drawing a card and getting some life, but you're going to be getting a bunch of mana out of it too, so it's pretty sweet. Sun Titan is a nice little bit of recursion, should be in most white decks. Sunscorched Regent is another one of those effects that's going to punish our opponents for using the resources we give them. He's going to get really big and gain us a lot of life. Thundering Mightmare doesn't only have an awesome name, it's also pretty sweet, because again, it's going to be punishing our opponents by making 2 of our creatures get bigger whenever they play any single card, so they're probably going to have to remove this pretty quickly. Windborn Muse is one of the classic ways to stop our opponents from attacking. They're going to have to pay 2 for each creature that wants to attack us. That's pretty expensive. And Windshaper Planetal is there for the shenanigans. We can totally mess with combat math. If somebody's coming with a Voltron commander at us for lethal, we can just swing it somewhere else, and then they're probably going to die. So it's an awesome, awesome card to have in the deck. You do have to cast it before blockers are declared, so you can't just wait till a creature's unblocked and then redirect it, but it's still pretty fun. Next up, we have our enchantments. First up is Aura Shards. We have a bunch of creatures in the deck, and we have some ways to make tokens as well, so this is just going to be dealing with our opponent's permanents very cleanly and efficiently. Burgeoning, I just recently got from the Secret Lair, and it's gorgeous, and I just want to put it into a deck, and this seems like a really good deck for it, because we're going to be giving our opponents lots of cards, so then when they play the lands that they get from those cards, we get to stay ahead by playing our own lands. Doubling Season is really expensive. If you don't have it, try to find something that adds more counters or creates more tokens. It works really well in this deck because it's going to double our treasure tokens if we need treasures, and it's going to double any counters we get from all of our counter abilities. So it fits really well. I do understand that it is very pricey though. Duelist Heritage, I think, is really awesome in this deck. It's going to make political situations very interesting. If you can kind of encourage an opponent not to attack you, you can say, I'll reward you by giving one of your creatures double strike. And then it also works on your own creatures, so you can make your jellyfish Gluntch actually kill people pretty fast in the late game, and it's difficult to remove with the high toughness. This can be really fun. Evolutionary Escalation is going to make one of your creatures bigger every upkeep, but it's also going to do it for one of your opponents. So it's a nice political play to help the weakest player in the table catch up. You can also make one of your guys bigger and bigger. And since you have so many effects that benefit from getting counters or that add additional counters, you're almost always going to come ahead with this effect. Ghostly Prison is another way to discourage attacks. We have a lot of those in the deck. Helix Pinnacle is one of our alternate win cons. I know that normally Gluntch decks run infinite combos or Approach of the Second Sun, but I find both of those kind of boring, so I want to give our opponents a bit more time to interact with us as they see stuff coming. We're going to use Helix Pinnacle here. It does have Shroud, so it can't be dealt with that easily, but if they have any mass enchantment removal, that's fine. It also takes 100 mana invested into this to win the game, although we do have a little bit of Proliferate, so I think it's a pretty fair and fun card to have in the deck. Lovesonger Night and Day fits the deck like a glove. We're going to get political and let an opponent draw some cards, but we're also going to be drawing those cards, so that's pretty nice. And then we're going to get a token. We don't really care that much about that, but the last part is really good because we're spreading out counters, and with all of our doubling and extra counters effects, that can actually be quite strong. Noble Heritage is a card that I didn't really think was that good a long time ago, but after seeing it recently in a Commander game absolutely wreck all of the table, I think it's actually a very good card, and it's great in this kind of a political deck, you're going to get an advantage, and then your opponents are going to have to make difficult choices about whether they want to grow their creatures but not attack you. So this seems very strong, and I think it's really good if you get it down early. Privileged Position is something that I've put in the deck because I opened it recently and I want to use it. It's something that is going to give protection to our whole board. I just think that it's nice to have a little bit of security blanket so that we don't just randomly get blown out by them destroying our ghostly prisons and being able to swing for lethal. Sandworm Convergence is going to give us a little bit of protection against flyers, which we need because we're kind of weak to them in the first place. And then we're also going to be making a 5/5 token at the end of each turn. That's pretty solid. Sphere of Safety is one that's been in a few decks of mine. In this deck, it's going to work pretty well. We have a bunch of enchantments, so this will often be at least a ghostly prison, but it can be better than that if we've drawn more than one enchantment. Together Forever is really solid. As long as we have a lot of mana up, our opponent is not going to be able to interact very favorably with our creatures because we can just return them to hand, and a lot of them have ETBs, so we're going to be able to reuse those. It's pretty solid. Viridian Revel is fine. It's replaceable if you don't have it or if you want to include something else. I think it discourages people from using the treasures you give them, but basically, yeah, it just locks them out of using that mana unless they want to give you cards. It's okay. It's not the best card in the world, but I think it has a place in the deck. For sorceries, we have Chronomantic Escape. It's a pretty cool one that's going to basically make you invulnerable once every 3 turns, so you're going to have a turn where people can't attack you. I didn't know this card existed. I just found it randomly in a search, and I'm going to put it in the deck and see how well it performs, see how annoying people are by it, and decide whether I keep it or not. Council's Judgment is just a good way to keep everybody engaged at the table. Everybody has to participate and decide what thing gets removed. Cut a Deal seems really good because you're giving your opponents a card, yes, but you're getting 3, so you're definitely coming out ahead. Dismantling Wave is a nice way to control problem permanence. I really like it, and then when it's cycled, you can destroy all of it. It can be really good against certain decks. Jailbreak is really fun, and it hits any permanent, so this can be really solid. There's many ways to break this so that it doesn't become symmetrical. So if you return something like a Sphere of Safety, for example, when you have a bunch of enchantments in play, it doesn't really matter what creature you give them back since it's not going to be able to attack you. So there's lots of little ways you can manipulate this to make it very beneficial for you. Nature's Law is just some nice ramp. Promise of Loyalty is a really sweet one. It's a board wipe that's going to let everybody keep one of their creatures, but those creatures can't attack you for the rest of the game, basically. So that's just really, really fun and can lead to some interesting shenanigans. Rampant Growth is just more ramp. Secret Rendezvous is one that I've been a little bit back and forth on, but I'm going to give it a try, see if it's worth including. Split the Spoils is again a very cool and interactive one, and you're going to get either 3 or 2 cards back with it, so it just seems pretty good. Tragic Arrogance is a pretty strong board wipe in Commander. It can get you back from some nasty situations, and seeing as you get to make all the choices, it can be very good. Next up we have Instants, we have Beast Within, and Generous Gift that are both going to help us deal with problem permanence. Jaheira's Respite is a really nice one for protecting us when we finally get attacked and searching a bunch of lands along the way. It's pretty solid. Your Temple is Under Attack is very flexible. We can draw cards and let our opponent draw cards if we really need to, but then it also acts as a great board wipe protection spell, which is very solid in this deck. And then moving on to artifacts, we have Contagion Engine. This can wipe an opponent's board if we needed to by putting counters on it and then proliferating, but it's also just going to let us proliferate twice every time we want to, which is going to be very, very powerful in this deck. Dogsteel Reactor is another of our alternate win conditions. I'm scared we won't be able to always win through damage, so I included Helix Pinnacle and this to try to win the game. Proliferate works really well with Dogsteel Reactor as well. Mind's Eye is going to be very good. We're making our opponents draw cards now and then, so paying 1 to draw a card ourselves whenever they do is very, very good. Soul Ring is a classic piece of ramp, and Strionic Resonator is going to let us double up on some triggers, particularly Glunch's trigger. It can also copy other triggers in the deck, such as Master of Ceremonies, so it's going to be well worth the inclusion. Ajani Sleeper Agent is another one I've included just because I opened it recently. I think the minus ability that lets us spread out counters onto multiple creatures can be really good, particularly if we have something like Generous Patron in play, which is going to draw us cards whenever we do so. This just seems like an interesting inclusion. Want to try it out. As for lands, we have Tangled Veil, which is going to double up as some ramp. Balaged Recovery is a nice one for getting back cards that have been destroyed earlier on in the game. Gavony Township is a nice one for putting more counters on our creatures. Khan's Bastion is going to let us proliferate, which is really solid in this deck. Scavenger Grounds is going to let us deal with our opponent's graveyards when we need to. And then we have Tectonic Edge to deal with any problem lands that our opponent may throw our way. Okay, so there you have it. That is my first Selesnya deck, Gluntch the Bestower. What do you think about this deck? Do you have any ideas? Please let me know in the comments section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to click like or subscribe. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me, and we're currently growing the channel. And until next time, take care!